All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're acting strictly as neutral auditors for you, the taxpayer. We're launching an investigative look into a massive, frankly pretty intricate report on the flow of public education money right here in Florida. So our goal? To follow the money trail and map out exactly where your dollars are going in what's been dubbed the education shell game. Now, if you're a local homeowner, you're probably looking at your recent property tax bills and just scratching your head. I mean, you're paying rising school taxes, right? You see the lottery revenue that was famously promised to fund education. You vote for those local referendums. And yet somehow you're hearing that your own neighborhood public schools are facing severe funding shortages or even shutting their doors completely. It feels entirely contradictory, doesn't it? Well, to unravel that confusion, we really have to look at how complicated this whole system has become. You see, Florida's education funding isn't just one giant pool of money anymore. It's a complex, layered stack of revenue streams. We're talking lottery money, property taxes, state taxes, voucher expansion funding, and local referendums. Because these streams are all managed so differently, it's gotten incredibly difficult for everyday taxpayers to track the ultimate destination of their dollars, who's paying and who is actually benefiting. Okay, let's move into Section 1, Money Follows the Child.
So the absolute foundation of Florida's current funding strategy is this concept called money follows the child. On the surface, it's a pretty straightforward idea. If a family chooses a private school, a charter school, or a homeschool program, the public funding attached to that specific child leaves the traditional district and moves right along with them. And while this undeniably gives families a lot more options, it fundamentally alters the taxpayer equation. Public dollars no longer flow through one centralized local system. Instead, they're dispersed across multiple private providers and individual accounts.
And the sheer volume of this shift is just staggering. This is definitely not some small niche program. Statewide data from March 2025 shows nearly 500,000 students utilizing these alternative education settings, over 265,000 in private options, over 115,000 using unique ability scholarships, and tens of thousands more in parent-directed programs. This is a massive, systemic redirection of public education money. To see how this impacts the local taxpayer, the report uses Broward County as a primary case study. And man, the numbers make the tension incredibly visible. Over roughly the last 8 years, Broward's traditional district-managed enrollment dropped by nearly 39,000 students. Meanwhile, looking ahead to the 2025-26 year, voucher participation is sitting at just over 35,000 students. So that massive drop in traditional enrollment practically mirrors the rise in alternative choices. Now, the financial weight of that shift is where things get really serious. Using the district's per-student funding estimates, that decline in traditional enrollment represents a rough funding exposure of over $350 million. That's $350 million moving entirely outside the traditional Broward public school system. And the crazy part? The district is projecting even further losses next year. This brings us to Section 2, the fixed cost problem.
But here's a major contradiction for you as a homeowner. If the money simply follows the child to their new school, why are local school districts going into the red and physically closing down buildings? Well, the answer lies in a huge contrast. Funding is incredibly mobile. If a student leaves on a Tuesday, their funding can theoretically follow them right away. But public school infrastructure? That is heavily rooted in concrete. When a student leaves, the physical school building they left behind doesn't shrink to match.
Think about what your property taxes are actually paying for. Electricity, roof maintenance, huge fleets of buses, campus security, insurance premiums, and long-term district debt. These fixed costs do not magically disappear overnight just because a few dozen students left the public system. I mean, the air conditioning still has to run, the roof still needs fixing. This is exactly why your property taxes stay high while your local school might still be closing. You see, a school district can technically be fully funded by the state in the aggregate, but because the money has followed individual students outward, that funding doesn't reach the specific neighborhood building with enough volume to cover those inescapable fixed costs. All right, let's dive into Section 3, following the missing money. Now that we understand the mechanics, we need to look at the actual audit trail. Because when public dollars are spread across multiple private systems, keeping accurate taxpayer receipts becomes absolutely vital. According to the Florida Auditor General, tracking this money has faced some serious accountability challenges. In the 2024-25 system, Family Empowerment Scholarship spending exceeded its budgeted amount by nearly $400 million. That is a massive unexpected overage. So what happens when a program goes $400 million over budget? Well, the state has to scramble and shuffle funds to cover the shortfall. They used $118 million in stabilization funds, but even then, final state payments to traditional public districts had to be slashed by over $47 million statewide. Broward County alone took a $5.3 million hit. The auditors explicitly noted that the funding did not reliably follow the child. Ultimately, this means millions in cuts hit the public districts directly, burdening the local taxpayers who fund those specific systems. And it's not just a district problem. State audits of a major scholarship funding organization revealed some really deep administrative issues. We're talking delayed tuition and parent reimbursements, placing immense financial strain on families. They found nearly $10 million in interest that was just not allocated to individual student accounts. They even found over $2 million transferred into accounts that had already exceeded their $50,000 cap, effectively tying up funds while other eligible students waited in limbo. As an impartial observer looking for a taxpayer receipt, the public money trail here is getting incredibly muddy. Which leads us to Section 4, Empty Buildings as Lost Public Assets. This is the ultimate, most visible consequence for the local homeowner driving through their neighborhood. Let's look back at our Broward County case study. The district has already approved closures and consolidations for several schools due to these exact funding shifts. Campuses like Sunshine Elementary, Palm Cove, North Fork, and Siegel Alternative are all being closed or consolidated. Discussions for these massive properties are now pivoting to repurposing, leasing them out for district offices, affordable housing, or even public safety training. This demands a hard shift in perspective from us as taxpayers. When a school closes, we aren't just losing classrooms. We're losing a neighborhood anchor. But more importantly, we're losing a massive taxpayer-funded public asset. You, the homeowner, have already paid for the concrete, the land, and the roof. You deserve absolute clarity on exactly who benefits when these public properties are repurposed, leased, or sold to private entities. And finally, Section 5, demanding a taxpayer receipt. So, how does this all build to the immediate future? And what's the bottom line for the 99% of taxpayers footing this bill? Well, you might have heard about upcoming property tax reform debates slated for 2026. But if you look closely at the proposals, they may aim to reduce non-school property taxes, but they largely leave local school board taxes firmly in place. This proves that the massive education funding burden isn't vanishing for homeowners. It's simply being rearranged on your bill. As we wrap up this explainer, let's review the impartial accountability checklist. The facts are clear. Regardless of whether you personally champion school choice or advocate for traditional public schools, the lottery did not replace your school taxes. Expanding vouchers does not eliminate the fixed costs of public buildings. Neighborhood schools are closing, even as overall state funding exists, and official audits show millions of dollars in exceeded budgets and delayed payments. For a system this massive, taxpayers urgently need a transparent dollar dashboard that tracks not just the child, but the money and the outcomes. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question to ask your local representatives. If you're a homeowner paying rising property taxes, before you're asked for another dollar, another referendum, or another sacrifice, you have every right to look at this layered, multi-million-dollar shell game and ask, where is our clear, transparent public receipt? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.